My friends, I thought I'd vary a little from the usual line of report and discussion by giving you a little description of a purely social affair. And by that I mean a luncheon with the President of the United States, President Kennedy. It happened recently when he invited the leadership of both the House and the Senate, and from both sides of the aisle, to come and be his luncheon guests at noon. Now, this was a very extraordinary luncheon in a sense. I do not mean that it was extraordinary from the standpoint of food, because food at the White House is always good, and this was no exception. Nor was it extraordinary from the standpoint of discussion particularly, because I should point out that it was purely social, and therefore we discussed no official state business, raised no difficult questions of any kind, nor did we sally into the field of politics, either partisan or otherwise. But it was extraordinary in this sense, that on this occasion, the President of the United States had served with every member in both the Republican and Democrat leadership in both the House and Senate, speaking for the 87th Congress. And that is extremely unusual. I've tried to just reconstruct in my mind what other presidents might have had that kind of privilege, because I think it was something of a privilege, not only for the president, but for the leaders as well. But as my mind moved from George Washington on down, through the whole concourse of presidents, I could remember no president or whoever had all of his leadership with him on both sides who had served with him in the legislative branch. And that makes it an extraordinary luncheon, because in my considered judgment it has happened at no time in the history of the Republic. Now we can just go down the list for this occasion and see who was there. And by rules of protocol, I should start with Mr. Sam Rayburn of Texas, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, who has served longer, I presume, as Speaker than any other man, and whose record of service in the House must now eclipse that of any other person who ever served there. So Speaker Sam Rayburn was one of the luncheon guests, and it was under his speakership that Mr. Kennedy served when he was in the 80th and the 81st and the 82nd Congresses as a member of the House of Representatives. And then the Vice President was there. Now, I recall the Vice President when we served in the House together long, long ago. And later he was elected to the Senate, became the majority leader in the Senate, became a candidate for the presidency against the incumbent president, and then became candidate for vice president. So President Kennedy served with Lyndon Johnson in the Senate of the United States before he became vice president. Now there's John McCormick, who is presently the majority leader and a congressman from the state of Massachusetts. I do not have in mind how long he served, but it's my guess that perhaps 18 or 20 terms. Now, he comes from the same state as the president. And in those earlier days, in the 81st and 82nd, I think Mr. Kennedy served under the leadership of John McCormick as the majority leader, and also under his leadership as the minority leader in the House of Representatives in the 80th Congress, which was the last time I served in the House of Representatives. Then we come to Kyle Albert of Oklahoma, who is the assistant majority leader, or what is better known as the whip. He has served for a long period of time, and Mr. Kennedy served with him in the House of Representatives. Now, at random, I can pick some others. On the Senate side, I could first pick Senator Stiles Bridges of New Hampshire, who is the senior Republican in the United States Senate, and I think he is now engaging on his 5th term. Well, Senator Kennedy served in the Senate with Stiles Bridges, and Senator Bridges is presently the chairman of the Republican the chairman of the Policy Committee on the Republican side in the Senate. Then we come to Senator Saltonstall. His present official position is chairman of the Conference of Republicans in the Senate. He's had a distinguished political career, for at one time he served a number of terms as governor of Massachusetts and was then elected to the Senate of the United States. So he served with his compatriot from Massachusetts, Mr. Kennedy, in the Senate. And then we go to Senator Keitel of California, who is the minority whip or the assistant leader. He also served when Senator Kennedy was in the Senate. And then we go to Mr. Mansfield of Montana, who is my opposite member in the Senate and who is now serving as the majority leader. He's a very distinguished person. He used to be a professor of history, as I recall, at the University of Montana in Missoula. Mike Mansfield, and I think that's his given name, Mike, and everybody calls him Mike, first came to the House of Representatives. I served with him there, even as did President Kennedy. Mansfield was then elected to the Senate. He served for a time as assistant majority leader, and he's presently the leader. And so the president had a tour of duty with him in the Senate. Then we come to Senator Humphrey of Minnesota. He had no House service. He served at one time as mayor of Minneapolis. He was on the faculty of Carleton College at Northfield, Minnesota, and then was elected to the Senate. And it was in the Senate that he served with President Kennedy. You may recall that Hubert Humphrey was also a very energetic and active candidate for the Democrat nomination for the presidency in 1960. But all that is gone by the by. He is serving now as an assistant to the majority leader. But he did have service with Mr. Kennedy when he was in the United States Senate. Then there's Senator Smathers of Florida. He's had a number of party positions. We all served together in the House of Representatives, and sometime after I moved across, Senator Smathers then came to the Senate and has been campaign chairman for his party, and also, I think, either chairman of its conference committee or chairman of its policy committee. And he is a part of the majority leadership and had long service in the Senate with Mr. Kennedy. Then there is Francis Walter of Pennsylvania. He was the chairman of the Un-American Activities Committee in the House of Representatives. As you recall, that's a highly controversial committee. Great many efforts have been made over the years to secure its abolition, but none of them have succeeded. Other efforts have been made to diminish the amount of money that this committee can spend on investigations. But as a general thing, the House has been very generous with this committee and let it go ahead with its work of ferreting out communism and subversion in this country. So Francis Walter is on one of the majority committees in the House and one of the leadership committees, and he also served over a long period of service with Senator Kennedy. Then we come to Congressman Halek of Indiana. He is presently the minority leader in the House of Representatives, and that makes him the opposite number of Congressman McCormick of Massachusetts. But his service has been continuous, as I recall, since 1934 or 36. And so he served in the 80th and the 81st and 82nd Congresses when Mr. Kennedy was there as a congressman. Then we have our own congressman from Melville, Illinois, Leslie Errant, who is presently the assistant minority leader or the minority whip. He came to the Congress, as I recall, either in 1934 or 1936. So you see, he's had a long tour of duty. And over a period of time, he's occupied this important position as the assistant to minority leader. So he served through those Congresses when Mr. Kennedy was a member of Congress. Then there's Judge Hovan of Iowa, who is the ranking Republican on the Agricultural Committee in the House of Representatives, and also on the Policy Committee of the Republican Party in the House. He also was at the luncheon, and he, over a long period of time, served with Mr. Kennedy. And then John Burns of Wisconsin, who had distinguished service in his own legislature, in his own state senate, when I think he was a presiding officer long ago, then came to the Congress and has served continuously for a good many years. And he also was there, and he, I think, is chairman of the Policy Committee of the Republican Party in the House of Representatives. So he served with Mr. Kennedy during that period. Here, then, is a roundup of the Republican and Democrat leadership in both branches of the Congress, and every one served with Mr. Kennedy. Now, I've forgotten one, and that is Senator Hayden of Arizona. He has had longer service in the United States Senate than any other man. He first came to the Congress as a delegate, as I recall, when Arizona was still a territory. And when it was made a state, he became Arizona's first congressman. And in a period of time, he was elevated to the Senate, has been here in the Senate for a long, long time. I think he rounded out over 49 years of public service just within the last week or 10 days. He is the presiding officer and the president pro tem of the Senate, and that makes him a part of the whole leadership. Now, I say this is very extraordinary, and then there's one aspect about it. When you have served with a man in the legislative branch, you get on first-name terms, and obviously it wouldn't do, by all the rules of protocol, to address the president by his first name. That long disciplined habit must be broken. And so everyone strives, and everyone disciplines his tongue so that he does not get out of line. But I thought it was an interesting footnote to history, for while we have our differences as to legislation, and while we may fight and fight with vigor and energy on opposing sides of some proposition, the fact remains, of course, that there is something enduring about the old friendships that are made in the legislative branch, and in this case, certainly, it will be no exception. That President Kennedy enjoys that distinction, I think, of having served in the legislative branch of the country with everyone who now speaks with some degree of authority as a party leader on Capitol Hill. I thought you might be interested in this little postscript to history.